Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Blood, Sweat, and Strife. Because of some unforeseen construction work next to Jeremy's house, I'm going to be conducting this interview a little bit solo today, but I am still very excited for it nonetheless. Our guest today goes by the handle the Leninist Lawyer on Twitter and sometimes uses the pen name Pete F. Seeger. He's a workers' compensation attorney in Georgia and a legal consultant for Native American nations. We're very happy to have him on the show today, and I think that this will be a really great discussion.
Howdy. Happy to be here.
Yeah, happy to have you. So at the top of every show, we just give our name and pronouns. So can I just call you like Pete for this interview?
Absolutely, that works out. Yeah. I'd be
Okay,
Pete.
cool.
Yeah. And
Cool.
yeah, I'm very happy to be here.
So, as always, my name is May, and my pronouns are she, they. And your pronouns are he, him, correct?
Yes, correct. Yeah.
All right, very cool. So yeah, how are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. It's kind of terrible weather, but it's been like that for like a week. But besides that, everything's doing fine personally.
That's great. Really good to hear. Yeah, it's been like very sunny weather here these past couple of days, which has actually been super nice, but it's kind of confusing because it feels like early summer, even though it's still like the dead of winter most of the time. But climate change gonna climate change, I guess. So yeah, today, since we have a lawyer on the show, we wanted to get into some questions surrounding the state of Israel, what they're currently doing, and sort of the legal framework or justifications which are being used versus the actual like reality of the situation according to international law.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so my first question for you this episode is if there is any legal justification under international law for what Israel is doing. Like, is this basically allowed?
So that's it's a short answer. No, there
Okay.
there isn't a legal basis for what they're doing, and there you can say that in the sense of that there are very strong international legal arguments for why what Israel is doing and has been doing since its inception is, in fact, against international law. But at the same time, law being part of ideology and subservient to economic needs, it really can be bent either way. So there can be, I wouldn't say equally as strong, but there are strong, arguments for, uh, for why they should be permitted to do it, in this circumstance, or they do have legal arguments that they are bringing. The most worrisome point of it is, we're seeing the ICJ cases, and those are, what's mainly in the news and the kind of international law world. But Israel's been taken to the ICJ before several times, and they've had the ICJ rule against them, and they just don't respond to it. They don't have to, and that's the real issue. Is international law exists, but at the end of the day, who is going to enforce it? So I think that's one of the scary um, things that comes with whether they have a legal basis, and it is, yeah, they can argue that they do, and at the end of the day, they don't really have to listen to anybody who says that they aren't. But at the same
Yeah.
time, there's very strong legal arguments for what they're doing is not backed by international law. And these arguments are coming forward right now in the ICJ cases, and they're being argued quite well. Um, but time will only tell, and really, we don't have time.
Yeah. It really is one of those things where like Time is running out for the people that we are trying to protect, and the people whom international law is supposed to protect. Like, I think something that we'll probably get into a lot during this interview is the legal justification for Israel existing in general, which, to my knowledge, according to international law, a settler colonial state that which is occupying the historic homeland of another people is illegal.
Yep.
However, they are backed up by the United States and by Canada and Europe. So even though we have these ICJ rulings, which are basically saying that Israel needs to stop what it's doing right away, it's just ignoring those, which is
Exactly.
very infuriating and like insane to see. Um, so yeah, like I just wanted to establish up front that there is no real legal justification or like framework for carrying out a genocide against another people.
Absolutely not. And it's not backed in. It there are so many legal inconsistencies that end up, coming to the conclusion that there is absolutely no justification for anything that Israel has done since their inception, and even before their inception. Um,
Hmm.
the legal repercussions from this, we have no clue what kind of consequences this should have. But one of the things that many people were aware of the ICJ case, discussing, you know, uh, whether or not there's a ongoing genocide happening, and that was very heavily covered in the news. And of course, we had the preliminary hearing, which we can talk about in more detail in a minute. Basically saying, we're going to look at it, preliminarily, we looked at it and looks like, there could be some genocide going on. So Israel, try to tone it down. But we'll come out with our decision in about, maybe 3 years or something like that, which is insane. But that is basically what they said. But we can go into more detail later. But the other case that didn't get as much coverage is another ICJ case that was requesting to know what the consequences were for the ongoing violations of international law of Israel just occupying mandated Palestine. And the arguments that have been made during this ICJ case are arguing that Israel does not have a legal right to exist, and that Israel is not the legal sovereign successor of the mandated Palestine, which is what Israel claims to be. Israel does not only claims to be a nation within mandated Palestine, they declare themselves as the sole sovereign nation within mandated Palestine, which
Yeah.
uh, which completely violates the international uh, right to self-determination that the Palestinian people have, um, which we can talk about more later as well. But it's the legal questions and the legal arguments that are popping up right now are are quite substantial, and the fact that the fact that the other ICJ case didn't get as much coverage is um, almost comical in the sense of it that it may not be as existential as trying to stop the genocide, but it is very, very necessary if there is going to be an actual end to this genocide that's
Exactly.
been going on for you know almost a century now. Um, it's terrible.
Yeah. And like this is kind of just like a stray thought, but like even from like a religious point of view, like the idea of Israel being the sole successor and like rightful owners of this land which is considered sacred to three major world religions is just
Exactly.
kind of weird.
It
Like it seems really unfair.
and it's, and when you start, looking at it, that way, it becomes confusing because it starts becoming very confusing because it doesn't make sense even in the religious context. It's, very confusing. It's like, well, there's so many people that do not believe in an ongoing genocide needing to occur, or a mass exodus of people. I mean, the brutality that's going on right now, and the Zionist project is not even supported by many devout members of the Jewish community, and
Yeah.
so masking it, and that is just such a heinous act. It really is just, it's a very, very grotesque bending of reality, that is damaging to so many different ideological apparatuses. I mean, to faith, and to, I mean, tons of different stuff, but uh, could go on forever, but very, very disturbing.
Yeah, definitely. Like in my experience, like a lot of the Jewish people in my life are anti-Zionist Jews. And this is a lot of this just has to do with the kind of circles that I'm in, but a lot of it too just has to do with the fact that there is no religious or legal justification for what the state of Israel is doing. Like I remember like a few months ago now, like there were IDF soldiers reading a Torah with a knife, which is just incredibly like anti-Semitic and disrespectful to the like heritage and the literature. And it's they are making it very clear that this is not about Judaism. This is about imperialism. This is
Hmm.
about undergoing an expansionist project. So these Israeli elite can continue to live luxurious lives at the expense of their neighbors and continue to bomb their neighbors. So yeah, it's just one of those things where like you do a little bit of digging beneath the surface and you look into what they're actually saying and none of it really tracks.
Exactly. And that's one thing that, when anyone who, you know, wants to look kind of through a Marxist perspective at the law that's going on right now, um, will notice that it's just contradiction after contradiction. It's just bizarre arguments that lead nowhere, that run into each other, that really, at the end of the day, just seem silly from a certain perspective. And the disturbing thing is that it doesn't actually seem silly to some people. And that's the power of law being, part of ideology, is people can be arguing from one side, and completely, you know, be missed by the other. And that's, somewhat of what's going on right now with these ICJ cases is, there is an argument on both sides, but I mean, you listen to the argumentation on both sides, and one of them sounds just absolutely insane. And it just doesn't seem to make any logical sense. Um, and it's quite interesting, and upsetting, of course, but very odd to be able to see that kind of just talking past one group that supports this settler colonial entity. It's very, very upsetting.
Definitely, yeah. They contradict themselves all the time.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Um, Another question that I want to get into with this episode is if this is illegal, like what Israel is doing, what position does that put countries like the United States in and other countries who are supporting Israel and giving them funding and whatnot?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, so going to the most recent I hate to keep on going back to the ICJ cases, but they're just a perfect example of what is going on right now, what consequences are currently at stake. Um, but if Israel is found to be committing a genocide, then that also will go against any countries that have been shown to be aiding Israel during the ongoing genocide. So the entire, you know, the fact we know for a fact that um, America, the United Kingdom, have been, providing weapons and material aid, to Israel and more countries than that. Those countries can and already have had domestic cases brought in their country to try to hold them accountable. So,
Hmm.
you know, the ICJ is not a criminal court. ICJ stands for the International Court of Justice. Um, and so it won't find anyone guilty of genocide. What they can do, though, is that they can claim that Israel's responsible for violating the Geneva Convention or any other specific provisions. Um, but if somebody wanted to bring an actual international criminal court case, then the evidence brought in these ICJ hearings would be the same exact evidence to be brought in. So the evidence that we're seeing being built right now is still very important because it will be used most likely in future cases.
Okay.
Um, and on top of that, the actual determination of what happened, um, like the preliminary ruling that they came to. So what they basically claimed was that they're that they're not going to rule on whether there is a genocide. They ordered Israel to do everything within its power to prevent genocidal acts against Gazans,
Hmm.
and they included acts like deliberately inflicting conditions of life, life ending, calculation to bring about like physical destruction of people, um, or anything that can be shown an intent to kill civilians. Now, that might ring to some people as like, oh, that's good that the international court said that, but then you have to remember, well, Israel's not really technically just yelling from the rooftops that they're doing that. They're claiming the entire time that, oh, we were attacked and this is Hamas and we have to, we're not meaning to kill anybody. We just are, happening to bomb hospitals and, whatnot.
Hmm.
So, will this actually make Israel change anything? No. They're going to keep on doing what they're going to do. This is basically, unfortunately, when you look at how this will materially be seen by the state of Israel, this is basically telling them to speed it up, to
Yeah.
get it over with so we can address it afterwards, which is very, very disturbing. And it's also sad to see, you know, a lot of members of the legal community still holding a lot of faith in the power of international law to do things. And law does have power, but it it mainly has the power to show people the horrors of what's going on. You know,
Hmm.
it's great that we have these cases coming forward because it's informing the greater public of what's going on. If it is ruled that there isn't a genocide later on, then I'm pretty sure the world would be pretty aghast. And that's, a pretty good glaring contradiction shown to the world. Um, and
Yeah.
that's something that, we can see actual material change happening, but nothing really too immediate. And so the the illegality of what the United States or the UK would end up facing. The UK has actually been requested to pay reparations several times to the Palestinian people for their involvement in the Balfour Agreement and also the mandate within the Treaty of Versailles. And there is a very strong legal case for them needing to pay reparations in the future, and nobody really has even looked into what that would look like. but there is a legal basis for it, and it's
Yeah.
been brought forward before uh, October 7th. But the UK definitely has a lot of international legal baggage that uh, is able to drag them in, even regardless if Israel was found guilty of genocide. Israel's existence is something that is laid at the feet of Britain, and so it definitely is something that's brought up a lot in these international cases. And the United States, it's pretty incredible when you see how many countries have stopped dealing with Israel and that the United States just hasn't stopped. They've just continued, in fact, increasing. And it really shows what states are being singled out in the fact that they're just, blindly aiding Israel in this. They're not even trying to pretend like they're trying to hold back in case there is a genocide or anything. They're just fully, nope, there isn't. We're going to give as much money as possible. And that definitely is going to translate in the future to the United States being brought in front of most likely an international criminal court. And a lot of people would go, oh, that's something to possibly look forward to, is some accountability. Well, you have to remember that George Bush uh, was also found to be a war criminal in an international court of justice, and that is something that judges within the United States will get angry at attorneys arguing habeas corpus cases. Will get angry at them for bringing that up
Mm.
because the United States doesn't agree with that ruling. It's like, well, what power does international law have if that can even occur? That a country can just go, oh, we don't agree with that one. I mean,
Yeah.
it it's such a just muddled, bended system that unfortunately is so tied to ideology and to the controlling status quo that it will always mimic it. Uh, but
Hmm.
it's pretty incredible. But certainly the United States and all countries that have been uh, helping definitely will be brought forward. There's already several NGOs within the U.S. and the U.K. that have brought domestic legal proceedings against actual individuals within the U.S. government and the UK. I believe there's several against Joe Biden already. There's several against members of his cabinet, senators, and a lot of people know that you can't sue the U.S. government. That's unfortunately a law, part of
Wow.
part of the United States law. You cannot sue the U.S. government, but you can sue individuals within the U.S. government
Okay.
based on actions that they've taken within the U.S. government. It's the same thing as a lot of people believe that if you get injured on the job, you can sue your employer. You cannot sue your employer if you get injured on the job. You signed away that right by signing on to workers' compensation. You have to go through workers' compensation to get paid for your medical bills, and it's been like that since the 1920s. You can sue your employer if they do something like grossly negligent, but that's that's very rare. It's kind of that same mentality as viewing the government almost as a corporation. It's like, no, if we injure you, you can't sue us, but you can sue an individual that's done it. So there's already many cases being brought against individuals within the government, and so that is ongoing, and there is a very strong legal basis for that.
That makes sense. Just to like kind of tie it into domestic issues real quick. Something that's very striking to me about the United States and Israel and the rest of these countries, just very like flippantly like going against international law. It reminds me of how like the cops function.
Hmm,
Like police officers
absolutely.
do not have to follow the law. All they have to do is enforce it, and enforcing it often means um, like enforcing the interests of the ruling class. So basically, like it almost feels like when you're describing this like international law to me, and how it has an interplay with the actual countries which the law applies to. Um, it feels like one of those things where if it's beneficial for the ruling classes in the most powerful nations on the planet, um, international law doesn't apply. You can just do it. It's not flawed. It's a system working as it's intended to, really.
That's, and that's the thing that makes it difficult, especially when talking to other lawyers that kind of inherently have a big faith in the law. And it it's this, interesting sense of that, the law is not going to go against what, you know, the ruling class needs. And also, when the law does, that doesn't necessarily mean that materially things are going to be different the next day. And many people know that legislation changed to, give the right to vote um, to individuals that then materially they still couldn't vote because of, individual laws or, just straight up violence.
Mm-hmm.
And, it took many years for that to be driven out, and it still isn't even driven out.
Oh
So
yeah.
laws, they may be a big neon sign saying, no, we don't want to do this anymore. But does that materially mean that those things aren't happening anymore? Of course not. You know, and that's the thing that's frustrating um, to talk about the law is because it's like, well, even if the law goes this way, does that mean that it's going to change anything? And really, at the end of the day, no. The law is not going to provide this revolutionary change that is needed to solve any of these problems. It will, mitigate the damage for a bit until, it falls apart again. And then some more laws need to, kind of patch it up. And, a lot of people will argue, they're like, well, look at the law. It really, has this nuanced way of dealing with this situation. It's like, well, yeah, of course. It has a nuanced way of dealing with this bad situation that basically perpetuates it. It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
solve it. It never puts a cap on these issues. What it does is it just reframes it. It makes puts up a roadblock and channels the, transgressions in another direction, if that makes sense. And it it's always this game of I mean, really just a game. It's a game of cat and mouse almost with the law. And especially in the international legal realm, people that have been doing research from the Marxist perspective have come to the conclusion of, there will be no revolutionary change from international law. It really has no meaning or foundation in anything. And that's a very grim, conclusion. But unfortunately, that is the case at the end of the day. Now, does that mean that all these cases are absolutely useless? No, of course not. They have ideological merit. It's good that it's in the news and that lawyers are able to, or anybody, not even just lawyers, but anybody can get up and talk, about why, even under the capitalist bourgeois logic that we, have upholding our system, even under that logic, it doesn't even make sense. It's a contradiction. And that is good. I think legal cases and legal arguments can really hammer out the contradictions within something. And that's
Mm-hmm.
that's a good thing. But it does need to be understood as it's not the end all be all, not even close. So much more has to be done. The legal realm is almost like advertising. That's basically its big goal.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting, but frustrating at the same time.
We not too long ago we interviewed another lawyer for the podcast. Her name was Cheryl Weichel, and she gave us this very interesting history of like landlord law and also stuff like the Warren Court and how for a time we were getting like more progressive decisions being handed down by the government. But since that period in our history, there have been organizations and societies like the Federalist Society, like put in place to make sure that progressive change does not happen and does not come from the legal system itself. However, like the law exists to basically just call balls and strikes. And this is often like a very like constitutionalist like view of the law, where they believe that if something is in the Constitution, then they shouldn't really rule on it. But what that really translates to is they can rule however they want. Like if
Exactly.
if there's nothing in the Constitution about abortion rights, then hell yeah, a state can restrict abortion. Um, so I think like when we get into these discussions about the law, it's important to keep in mind that while it can be a tool that like more progressive people can use to try to improve the conditions of the society around them and to prevent certain horrible things from happening, it's also law applied in the context of a liberal bourgeois society. And in a liberal bourgeois society, the law is always going to favor the ruling class.
Exactly. And that's and that's one of the most important points about it is, the idea of the base and superstructure. We have the, neoliberal capitalist bourgeois economic base, and the superstructure where law, ideology, religion, all these things are constantly being uh, affected by it. And of course, the economic base is also affected by the superstructure, but not in a transformative kind of way,
Mm,
or not as much of a transformative way. Um, but the the law itself is something that can be a very good tool. It just needs to be understood that it has its limits. It really has its limits.
yeah.
It cannot go past them. And those limits are at at the line where you are actually doing, for lack of a better term, damage to the capitalist system. It will
Hmm.
prevent you from really taking chunks out of it. Um, and that's upsetting. I mean, but that's just that's to be expected from something that is, at the end of the day, Engels said it really, in my opinion, he said it best. I have it uh, on my Twitter page. Is the quote above my thing, and it basically just says that the law is the creation. It's written by the bourgeois. It's written for them and by them to keep them in power. And hell, yeah, they'll throw some people under the bus every now and then, but uh, it won't be anything to take down the capitalist system. It will just be something
Yeah.
to grease the wheels, keep it going. Um, but yeah,
Oftentimes you get these people who will like kind of take the fall for a bunch of other people in the
very
context
true.
of the
Yeah,
capitalist system. Like Jeffrey Epstein was one of those guys, Harvey Weinstein was one of those guys. There are plenty of examples of these things, and every once in a while it's almost like the ruling class will like offer up a sacrifice to us, with just to kind of
yeah.
like just to kind of appease us and get us to shut up for a little while. Like, look, we got the rapist out. He's in prison now. Are you happy? And it's
I
just
mean,
like,
honestly, it's
yeah.
insane. It does feel like that. It feels very cultish, like and legal cases do kind of create that framework too of like, ah, we found this one guy, and we're going to make an example out of him, and then the
Hmm.
law will be formed. No one else can do it. Works, but but they will offer that scapegoat. Capitalism loves scapegoats.
Yeah,
And if they
definitely.
can do a whole group of people, even better. But if they have to just, get one of their own individuals and leave them out in the cold, then they'll do it.
Hmm.
It's impressive.
Yeah. Um. So, where do you want to take the interview from here?
Well, one thing that I thought might be helpful to do, just to kind of lay out, just because it might be helpful for the listeners to just know, is what the real legal argument for why Israel doesn't exactly have a right to exist, or at least what aspects of Israel make it a violation of international law.
That would be fantastic.
So yeah, the most recent out of all the ICJ cases, I guess the one that has the most. It's sad to say that the case trying to determine whether there's an ongoing genocide, they're not going to come to a decision on that in time for it to have any effect upon the absolutely the absolute ongoing genocide that is happening, which is very depressing, but just a state of reality. But the one case that appears that it could have some long-standing effects upon just the continuation of the state of Israel is the case. It's asking just what are the consequences of the various violations that have occurred, and it hasn't exactly gone viral, although it should. Is there's a great uh, whole argument that was done by Dr. Ralph Wild for the Arab League at this ICJ case, and he lays out in about 20-minute oral argument, just fantastically done, step by step, what kind of violations have occurred since the inception of the state of Israel. And he starts even with declaring, that that there's been more of a century long denial of self-determination and a war against the Palestinian people based on racism.
Hmm.
And he goes through a very, very strong argument, and just think it would be good for most people to, one, go and look that up. Dr. Ralph Wild, his ICJ oral argument, but also just to go through some of the things that he brings up that are very important to know. One of which is that the Palestinian people, one legal distinction that um, is an issue is that, well, the state of Israel does not view the Palestinian people as citizens. They are
Hmm.
not permitted to be citizens. They just are treated as people who happen to be within Israel. And in that way, they try to deny the fact that the Palestinian people have sovereignty or even have a right to sovereignty. And based on all of the actions of Israel, legally, they have denied sovereignty to the Palestinian people from day one. And that's a very important part of the argument that for against the state of Israel to exist. And in the quote sacred trust is what it's called, the sacred trust obligations found in Article 22 of League of Nations Covenant, which is actually a part of the Treaty of Versailles, came out after World War One, so it goes all the way back there. Um, so it came out and had the Palestinian mandate under British colonial rule, and it came out of that they recognized that the Palestinian people would have the ability to have their own independent state. So
Hmm.
by stating that the goal of the mandate was to give sovereignty to the Palestinian people, that already puts a big legal strain on the argument that the Palestinian people do not have the right to self determination. Now, what Israel tries to claim is they try to claim that, oh, when all of this was going down, there was not a legally, an international, legally recognized right to self-determination for colonized people. That didn't exist. So basically, Israel's argument is, well, it wasn't illegal then, so, why would we be held against it now? It's
Yeah.
old news. And that's, I mean, insane, an insane argument, still a legal argument nonetheless, which is terrifying. Um, but the big argument against that is, okay, well, even if there wasn't a internationally recognized right to self-determination, which I think most people would argue that there doesn't need to be a legally recognized. Once it's recognized, it's always been there, but that's going to another place. But even under that, if you look at the mandate itself, within the mandate, it says that its goal is to allow an independent state for the Palestinian people. Well, okay, even if there isn't an internationally recognized right to self-determination within the actual founding document, it says it in there. So we don't even have to read it in. So if people are real constitutionalists, they'll have fun with this one. They can just read the, fucking mandate and they'll see that there is a what would be called a sui generis right of self-determination. It's different than the internationally recognized right of self-determination, but can be read into the document. So
Okay.
that's one very important aspect that's been brought up that I think is a very, very strong legal argument to just the fact that the denial of self-determination is, the greatest violation that has existed in this. And that is, when you think about the legal basis of a settler colonial society, is the basis for how it works. I mean, that is the legal basis for um, settler colonial state is the just denial of the self-determination of an entire people. And
Hmm.
you have, after the Second World War, the self-determination right was made applicable to colonial people, and that was put into international law. And for the Palestinian people, it should have, corresponded to them, and also should have supplemented, the pre-existing covenant right, regardless. But the 1947 proposal to partition Palestine was completely, contrary to the existing right of self-determination.
Hmm.
And a lot of people will go back to, that moment and be like, oh, well, the Palestinians were given so many times and so many options to, have a peaceful process in this, and they denied it every time because they're just, anti-Semitic. I mean, heck, I've seen that comment and that argument, in news for, a long time now. But the insanity behind that is, well, there was no legal basis for them to claim to be able to partition Palestine. That wasn't
Yeah.
something that was even in the legal realm of possibility. It was completely contrary to the existing document and the existing agreement for the mandate of Palestine. So when the Arab population rejected, the partition, that was an affirmation of the quote legal status quo. And
Hmm.
so they were doing nothing but the actual international legal recognized thing that they should have been doing. They should have denied it. That because a partition would have completely taken away their right to self-determination. And so in 1948, Palestine was, legally a single territory with a single population, and they were enjoying a right to self-determination on, a unitary basis. But that was when the Nakba happened, and that was the beginning of the violation of self-determination with the Nakba, and the creation of a regime that created this ongoing violation of the rights of the Palestinian people
Yeah.
on the grounds of racial discrimination, apartheid, and they also claim a denial of the right to return. And all of those things coming from the Nakba in 1948 um, make, begin the just clear violation of the rights of the Palestinian people.
Exactly.
I mean,
Yeah.
the state of Israel. was proclaimed in 1948, um, uh, to be, they completely accompanied by force, a complete displacement of a large number. And, the Nakba is uh, it, something that's understood by most individuals that are familiar with the situation. And this is, this illegal secession was, the violation that's continued to this day, and
Yeah.
Israel's statehood being even recognized, and also Israel's admittance to the United Nations after that, all of them should be seen as void because of the illegality of Israel's founding on that basis. It shows that Israel is not the legal continuation of the successor of the mandate. They are not the legal successors from England. And the right of the Palestinian people for self determination puts the Palestinian people with that right. And so the ongoing violation is very, very clear on this basis. And on top of that, um, he continues the argument for the legal argument continues on the fact that the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, Palestinian territory, those that annexation was just a mere continuation of this ongoing genocide and colonial rule of the state of Palestine.
Hmm.
And so this legal argument doesn't just start, of course, it doesn't just start October 7th, but it doesn't just start with, the wars in the 60s. It really is something that goes all the way back to the ideas around the foundation of Israel, the
Yeah.
actual mandates that formed it. There's contradictions even there. And I mean, the fact that such strong legal arguments can be made on that basis shows just the inherent contradiction with how individuals view the world should work, if that makes sense. And that's one interesting aspect of law to be applied here, and law in the sense of ideology, is a lot of people look at law and can get frustrated because it doesn't turn out how they think it should. And that's powerful because the idea of how they believe it should come out can usually has a decent basis in the actual good thing. But the just from the Nakba onwards, there is just ongoing arguments about who was the aggressor. And if you go back to the original mandate, it doesn't matter who the aggressor was. Uh, the fact
Yeah.
that a people who have a legal right to self determination have had that denied, they have the right to defend themselves. And that's where it goes back to. It doesn't go back to, October 7th or anything like that. It really goes back to the Nakba at the beginning. And
Hmm.
it may seem odd to people to go back to something that happened in 1948, but the people that were displaced from 1948 have not been able to return. This continued
Yes. Yeah.
denial of the right for the Palestinian people to return to the land that they've been expelled from is the ongoing uh, and active violation of their right to self determination. Uh, and that's the real core of the basis that is being argued. I still encourage everybody to go and listen to him argue it. He's much, he lays it out very clearly and as fast as he can. So you may have to slow it down and maybe look up what some of the terms mean. But he lays it out very clearly, and it's incredibly strong legal argument to show that, I mean, even before the inception, there were contradictions that show that this ongoing situation has no legal grounds for continuing.
Yeah, I mean, like, you could even go back further than the Nakba. There's There's Ghassan Kanafani's writings on, I believe, the 1936 through 39 revolts in Palestine. And even in the
Yes.
1930s, before apartheid was like legally established in Palestine, Palestinians were still making about half as much in wages as the average Israeli was making, or the average Jewish settler at the time was making before, because this was before
Hmm.
the state of Israel was founded. Um, so like it's been an illegal apartheid system for a very long time. Before it was formalized into law, it was being practiced. And I think another point that I want to make is that when people talk about the two-state solution, they're talking about legitimizing all of these colonial holdings which Israel has taken from the Palestinian people. Um,
Exactly.
and I mean, not to mention that's just like a very racist argument that like majority Muslim Palestinians and majority Jewish people are just can't live together in one state as equal citizens. But when we talk about having like a two-state solution, we're really just saying that um we need to allow the state of Israel to continue to exist in spite of the fact that it doesn't have a legal framework for existing. And we're also saying that what Israel has been doing throughout all this time, how they have gone about expanding themselves, is legitimate. So I think that like the two-state solution talking point is just really counterproductive and misunderstands the reality of the situation.
Absolutely. It's a comfortable place. It's a very liberal, idea, and it's comfortable to be like, oh, it's a very both sides kind of argument of, oh, we can have a two-state solution. And the incredibly frustrating part of that is that there's been no desire from the Israeli government to have a two-state solution.
Oh
They're
no.
very open about never wanting that.
They
And
kind
I
of
mean,
had that in the
that's
90s,
okay.
right? With the PLO.
Yeah,
Yeah, like
yeah, exactly.
Israel was like, we promise we won't expand anymore. And then they violated it on the first day.
Exactly. I mean, and the thing that's very interesting about, this the situation of, settler colonialism in Israel is there is such a clear line of continuation about how America has treated the Native American nations, and also how Israel has continued to have these treaties, have these agreements that will function correctly, and then just completely going back on them or
Absolutely.
acting in one thing that people may not know is the current military occupation zones in Israel uh, came out of Israel saying that they were acting in self-defense, and that they had to take the West Bank and the Gaza Strip from Egypt and Jordan because they were anticipating a quote non-immediate imminent attack, which is one of the, I mean, most insane titles you could give something, a non-immediate imminent attack. That makes no sense. But anyway, that was their claim, and in that way they could claim that it was self-defense, which is
Hmm.
insane. It's like, oh, I thought you were going to hit me, so I shot you, and
Yeah.
it was self-defense. It's like, and the international community just was like, okay, yeah, that's fair. And for people that want to, argue that, oh, no, the international community was upset about it, but nothing, we couldn't get anything to change. Well, then the international community really didn't care about it. No enforcement happened, so it doesn't matter. What a few NGOs or a few people were, arguing in their, leather chairs, in the legal field, like, good, you were fighting the good fight, I guess, but at the end of the day, the material, uh, action that happened in the legal community was just to let it continue happening. I mean, we're looking at the consequences of that ongoing for so long right now.
Yeah.
And it's it's really insane. I mean, the war was over in 6 days because they had no idea it was going to happen. They I mean, it's insane. There's so many just oddities to the history of the relationship between the state of Israel, the international community, and their treatment of the Palestinian people. But at the end of the
Hmm.
day, Israel just hasn't had to listen. They just don't have to listen because they have the guns behind them. They have the big imperialist powers always backing them. And as long as they're backing them, then you know who's going to stop Israel? If somebody tries to stop Israel, then we all know who's going to join on Israel's side. And that's the answer right there to, will something come out of these international cases? It's like, well, if anything comes out of it, it'd be a full scale conflict. We can almost all agree on that. So
Yeah.
um, it, people have to keep their heads in reality when looking at these legal cases because they're not going to create as much change as they think. But the original legal basis for it is very nice. And before I leave Dr. Ralph Wild's oral argument, he ended it, which I thought was very nice with the poem, the last words of Rafat Alier,
Hmm.
that the poem that he composed before being killed uh, on December 6th, and he ended his oral argument with that, which um, was very powerful to end such an amazing oral argument for why the basis of what's going on has no grounding in international law.
Yeah.
But yeah, certainly encourage everyone to go listen to that one.
I'll
Very
link
good.
to it in the show notes.
Wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, it really is like something that is very striking about this conflict is it has a very long history, but the history itself is also very recent. Like there are Palestinians who are alive today who remember the first Nakba. Um,
Yeah.
there there are little old people who saw their lives ripped apart by this settler colonial entity. And like seeing all of this play out practically again, but in the modern day, is it's very jarring for a lot of people. Like something I've been hearing a lot is that all of this feels very out of time. Like it feels like we should be past the age of colonialism at this point because when we're taught about colonialism, at least in at a basic level in most schools, we're taught about it like it was this thing that happened in the past. Like I've literally been told before that I sound like I'm from the 1800s when I'm talking about Israel. Um, but it
That's not my fault.
that's not my fault. They're doing 1800 shit. Like
Exactly. It's not my fault. They're like a fucking empire from like the 1700s. Like Jesus, what the fuck? No, yeah, exactly.
yeah. But yeah, it feels like we should be collectively past this, and in some ways we kind of are because this is illegal according to international law. However, it's a
Yeah,
matter of who is going to enforce international law and who has the power to ignore international law. And
exactly.
since Israel is just a little guy who has the backing of the United States and Europe and Canada, it feels like it can just completely ignore everything that has been put in place to prevent this sort of thing.
Absolutely. And kind of to go back to something that you mentioned before, the scapegoating is you can kind of see the process that the US and the West is trying to get out of this situation, for lack of a better term, is all of a sudden the enemy is no longer Israel. Now there's a group of liberals that the enemy is just Benjamin Netanyahu, and that is
Yeah.
the only. And there's a very good possibility that instead of Israel being held criminally accountable for their actions and their existence, that Benjamin Netanyahu will be just held accountable. And law really likes to do that, like we were talking about, and that's something to be very wary of, because that unfortunately would be an ideological success for the neoliberal world, to be able to continue with this settler colonial entity, uh, left almost unscathed by being able to just throw Benjamin Netanyahu under the bus.
Yeah.
And they have a lot of outlets to be able to do that. There's cases that have been pending in the Israeli judicial system that if the United States wanted to, or the West wanted to, they just have to put some money in the right place and have the right thing happen. It wouldn't be very difficult or different than what we've seen happen time and time again. Um, but hopefully, since we have seen this time and time again, maybe the greater public will have a little bit of better goggles on to see through it. I hope. I somewhat feel like after the uh, post 9/11 world has become a little bit more aware of conflicts starting for no apparent reason and ending for no apparent reason.
Yeah.
Um,
I
but who knows?
I mean, like, I think that in some ways social media has really, like, democratized information because, like, not only
Mm.
are we hearing, like, news reports about what's going on in Palestine, like, on the TV in a very, like, curated way, we're seeing videos coming directly from Palestinians. And I think that these experiences and seeing these things for people are very radicalizing. Like, at this point, if you aren't backing a free Palestine, then, like, what the fuck are you doing? I'm not going to talk to you.
Yeah,
um
no, and uh, that wasn't the case before, and well, personally, it definitely was, but for a lot of people, this most recent situation has really, really brought it. Uh, it's shown what an existential illegality all of this is. That
yeah.
it's not something that we can just ignore. It cannot be something that is ignored. It if it is, it will end. And this is very scary to see that it really does look like the intentions of Israel is to completely decimate the population.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, law is not going to jump in front of that. The resistance that's ongoing right now is really the only thing that is holding that back, and that's very very scary.
hmm Yeah, and I think that segues very nicely into a topic which we'll probably end up like wrapping up the episode with. What can we do to right now legally resist at home?
Right. And that's it of course the nuances can differ state to state, but one thing just in the broader view is of course have your you have your right to go and join protests. You absolutely should show up in numbers and have to organize protests. For kind of lack of a better term, is the more risky you are in your protesting, the more damage can be done necessarily. But the real message of that is that if you're doing something risky, there is a lot of risk to it. There can be
Yeah.
repercussions,
Yeah.
but you see a lot of the things going on. I mean, there are laws against even as an organization calling for a boycott against Israel, uh, and those are anti-boycotting laws that exist in most states, which is insane. When a lot of people hear that, they don't even believe it, but no, look it up. Your state's probably one of them. But and the greater, you know, uh, look is it's getting harder to even exercise the basic, um, rights that we have, like just assembly to a protest. But you know, don't let the laws discourage you too much for, at least in Georgia, what I mean is there's a lot of there's ongoing laws to prevent bail funds. There's laws that are being passed to make it probable cause for criminal activity to not have your phone on you. There is they literally are taking the fact that you have your phone off or not on you as probable cause that you are going to commit a crime or you have the intention to commit a crime, which is absolutely insane. But the
Mm,
fact that that is being pushed um, means that there is a legal argument for it, and if something makes it into court, then it can go either way. It really is not a situation where something's an impossibility. Anything's a possibility. But absolutely, um, donations to help individuals or to help groups that are trying to get aid. That is absolutely something that is helpful. Showing up to protests, that is absolutely helpful and needed, and you are able to do that. You are permitted to do it. If somebody's like, "Oh, you need a permit," most places you do not need a permit. If you're on the sidewalk, you don't need a permit. You don't need to go into the road. That's where a police officer can grab you if you're protesting and you start walking into the road. That sounds like a very minor offense, but that's the main thing that I see people get nabbed for because it's very easy to just accidentally step off the sidewalk.
mm,
That's something that they get people in Georgia a lot for. But one of the best things is find a group that you're going to attend an protest with. That already having a group to do so is good for just organizing purposes. But also having strength in numbers is important, and that be smart with it, but also know that before you go to a protest, look up what your rights are. Make sure you know what you can and can't do,
yeah.
and make sure that the people with you know what you can and can't do. And that's not like oh, follow the law, kids. It's mainly if you want to be effective, you need to know the laws so you know what to do and what not to do.
You're more
um,
used to the cause out of prison than in prison.
Exactly, and also, for lack of a, better way to say it, if you are going to circumvent the law, it is good to know what the law is that you are circumventing. So it's always good just to know what your rights are, know what's legal, know what's not, be safe, and also be smart with it. There's some people that have really put, um, for lack of a better term, their lives on the line in legal situations. It was a while ago, but Kala Washington's still, facing the legal action for standing in front of weapons manufacturers, and that's definitely something that you can do and something that needs to be done. But know that if you're on private property or in front of a company, they're going to call cops on you. They're going to do it. They do not care, and when those cops show up, they're not going to care either. But that doesn't mean don't do it. That just means know what you're getting yourself into.
Hmm.
There's a time and place for everything, and just be smart with it, for lack of a better term. But on the grand scheme, um, things are getting harder. States are really cracking down on stuff. Georgia is kind of looking like a ground zero, surprisingly, for a lot of these laws to crack down on protesters, mainly because of the cop city that's being built in Atlanta or trying to be built in Atlanta,
Hmm.
and the organization preventing that's actually being very successful in preventing that, which is wonderful to see. But uh, law enforcement and legislation is really coming out in full force to figure out how to prevent it.
Yeah.
And it's really showing just clear fascistic laws that are coming out to completely quell, people's rights that they were pretty confident they had.
Hmm.
And it's rough, but the fight is ongoing in many different realms. But just when you're protesting, which you should be protesting, do it smart.
Yeah. I think as we become more hardened and like aware of the reality of the situation, we start doing more stuff about it. The ruling class is going to
Hmm.
become a little harder as well. And they're going
Yeah.
to get really nervous and start passing a bunch of laws to curtail our rights. Like I remember a few months back now, there was a Senate resolution which was unanimously passed that not only condemned Hamas, but they also condemned like free speech related activity on college campuses,
Yep.
um, which were was voicing support for Palestine and Palestinians. So while there aren't really a lot of like federal laws on the books right now, which are saying that you're not allowed to protest or not allowed to say free Palestine or anything like that, they are kind of trying to take steps to limit what we're allowed to say and do. I mean, we've had sedition acts put in place in this country before. I think the last time that happened was World War I, and they could hypothetically like do that again.
Absolutely. I try to tell leftists as much as possible. It's like, I mean, as bad as you saw it, in the history books, with the Warren Commission and, the Red Scare, those laws are still in the books. you know, those laws just, that's not really something that is impossible. It's very, very possible.
Yeah,
There's so
definitely.
many things that people would be blown away that is still proper legal precedent. I mean, it's still proper legal precedent for eugenics in this country. That still hasn't been overruled.
Oh yeah.
I mean, there's just amazing and just terrifying amounts of things that are technically not illegal, but of course we would never do those things. And it's like, well, you did them once, like, you know. So it's very scary.
Yeah.
But no, absolutely. Those laws are on the books. The sedition laws are still on the books. If we ever got into a conflict, it would not be very hard at all to get, a decent portion of the American population to be like, no, we're at war. You don't need to say anything bad about the USA. I mean, it wouldn't be very hard to get a large group of people to believe that, support something like a sedition law.
Yeah.
People have to remember that. I mean, just remember the kind of propaganda and the, drumming up of bloodthirstiness that came, right after October 7th, and also what came during the early days of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I mean, the just bloodthirsty, just racist, just horrible language that came from liberals and conservatives and even leftists. I mean, it just uh, it's people need to be careful.
Yeah.
I mean, it these kind of laws impossibilities by any means.
hmm I do think though that um while I'm not like super involved in activism in my community because of a number of reasons, I do keep up with a lot of local activists and I'm friends with some local activists, and the communities that they are building around these issues right now seem like they're going to be pretty durable. Like
Yeah,
if laws come out on the books that make these organizations need to go underground, they will go underground and they will still be around in some shape or form. And I want to inject a little bit of optimism into the conversation because while we are facing up against a lot of like really scary stuff, there are genuinely really good people in the world who are trying to make a difference and are doing the hard work necessary to build community with each other, which could challenge power. Like people are already talking about building dual power structures. So I think that
absolutely.
like while the path is fraught with peril, things things are never static. Things never go just in one direction, and I think there's a lot of room for things to improve in serious ways.
Absolutely. I mean, the quote that always comes to my mind and probably most Marxists' mind is the Gramsci quote, you know, pessimism of the mind, but optimism of the spirit. And that really is true. We have to know what bad things we're dealing with, but also at the same time know that you know at the end of the day, a better world is possible, and you know we know that we are working hard to find that road and to follow that road, and that's something that is the life mission of being a leftist, an anti-capitalist, or a Marxist, whatever you want to call yourself. It's an ongoing journey.
Exactly. We're not going to see the end of it in our lifetime, but we can leave the world a little bit better than how we found it.
Exactly. I believe it. I don't know where in the Bible it comes from, but Pete Seeger used to use it. The musician, but he used to talk about planting trees that you won't enjoy the shade of,
Hmm.
and that really is the life of that we have to view as we may not enjoy it ourselves, but by God, somebody will one day.
I love that.
Yeah,
I think that's a great note to leave it on for today. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. We really appreciate it.
absolutely. My pleasure. Yeah, I had a blast. A great time.
Yeah, so this has been Blood, Sweat, and Strife. I've been May, and I'll see you all next time.